What's keeping Sudan's president in power? Omar Al Bashir refuses to resign despite 4 months of mass protests. And for the first time, soldiers have intervened to protect protesters. So is military support for the president wavering? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. Now, it was anger at the price of bread and fuel that sparked mass protests in Sudan. That was last December. 4 months on, the rallies have evolved into demands for an end to the 30-year rule of President Omar Al Bashir. And for the first time, Sudanese protesters got as far as army headquarters in the capital, Khartoum, where the president also has a home. Riot police and intelligence service agents fired tear gas to disperse the protesters, but some soldiers stepped in to protect them. Nonetheless, army commanders have so far resisted calls to help remove Bashir. At least 11 people have been killed since Saturday. The opposition Sudan Congress Party now says it's formed a transitional council to lead the country. So why has Omar Al Bashir been in power for so long? Fintan Monaghan takes a look.
He's often known as the master of political survival. Omar Al Bashir has faced much turmoil during his 30-year rule, from the loss of South Sudan to war in Darfur and indictments in the International Criminal Court for war crimes and genocide. He didn't come from the political elite. Born in 1944 into a farming family, Bashir began his career in the army and rose through the ranks. In 1989, he led the military coup which ousted the civilian government. Since then, his critics say his rule has been repressive and dictatorial. Opposition parties and critical media are silenced. The 75-year-old was most recently re-elected in 2015. Opponents say the vote was neither free nor fair. In February, Bashir announced a year-long state of emergency and stepped down as chairman of the ruling National Congress Party. That was aimed at calming the biggest challenge to his power. The army says the demonstrators must be heard and appears to support him for now. But with some soldiers siding with the protesters, whether Bashir can continue to survive is increasingly questioned. Fintan Monaghan for Inside Story.
Right, let's introduce our guests now. Joining us from London is Khalid Omer Yousif. He's Secretary-General of the opposition Sudanese Congress Party. In Berlin, we have Jean-Baptiste Gallopin, who is a Sudan researcher and a PhD candidate at Yale University. In Washington, D.C., we have David Shinn, a former Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Sudan. Thank you all very much indeed. But Khalid, can I come to you first and ask you to explain why it is that President Bashir remains in power despite 4 months of the most sustained protests that the country has ever seen?
Actually, the guy repeating the history of the dictatorship everywhere in the world. He thought that he is going to govern the country for indefinite time. He's trying to challenge the will of the people, but the will of the people of Sudan prevail. I can assure that.
Forgive me for butting in. Forgive me for butting in because it clearly hasn't prevailed yet, has it? President Bashir is still in office, and I'm asking you why your greatest attempts to have him resign don't seem to be working just yet.
I think you have to be prepared to announce his step down very soon. What I can assure now, those are the final maybe hours of Bashir ruling era, maybe days, but his time is going to an end now in Sudan.
All right. Coming to you then, Jean-Baptiste, in Berlin. On what does President Bashir's political present and future actually depend? What are the elements that are propping him up in power at the moment?
Well, I think at this stage, the crucial factor will be the behavior of the security forces and the military. Bashir has He's a very shrewd operator, and I would be careful not to declare him politically dead yet. During the Syrian uprising, there was a time where it looked like the regime was going to fall, and eventually it reascertained the initiative. So things are very open, but the way Bashir has survived so long is by manipulating the security services and the military one against the other, and by building up several distant lines of authority within the military and security apparatus. And we've seen in the past 24 hours that some elements of the military now have sided with protesters. It remains to be seen whether other branches of the apparatus, notably the National Intelligence and Security Services and the Rapid Support Forces, will turn against Bashir as well.
All right. David in Washington, tell us then about the broader geopolitical influences on the situation, and perhaps why we haven't heard more from the United States, from the EU, from Norway. Those are the countries most invested in various peace processes within Sudan. But what are their particular interests at this moment?
Well, we have heard some from the Troika of the United States, Norway, the United Kingdom. Back in January, a relatively strong statement was issued. The United States has subsequently protested the violence that has taken place. But basically, the thrust of your question is accurate. There has been relatively little said in view of the length that this protest has gone forward and the amount of violence that has occurred throughout the protest. And I think the international community is in something of a watching and waiting mood. They're not quite sure how this is going to turn out, and as a result, they're not taking sharp sides.
All right. And coming back to you, Khalid, it's been pointed out, or suggested at least, that this is... Sorry, let me come back to you, Jean-Baptiste, in a moment. Khalid, let me just ask you, because some people are suggesting that this is a critical moment. Let me just address this point to Khalid, Jean-Baptiste, that this is a critical moment for the protests. The fact that some elements of the armed forces have allowed the protesters to get to Army HQ in the centre of Khartoum, very close to one of the houses of the president, is extremely significant.
Actually, the army took the right decision, is to be by the side of people. People of Sudan now taking street for more than 3 months, and during those more than 100 days that has been passed, they have been left behind by the international community. They have been facing a great amount of violence from the security apparatus, but still they keep their will high, and they march till they reach and taking the streets in front of the army headquarters. Yesterday, the security services tried to attack the protesters, but the army officer protected the protesters and took the side of the people of Sudan. And so, at this moment, just 1 hour back, the opposition announced that their demand for the immediate step down of Al Bashir, asking the army to engage with leadership council that has been appointed by the opposition alliance to discuss the transitional arrangement for a civil transitional government. And I do believe now we are witnessing a very crucial hours. And our reading, if you have the last news now from Khartoum, all the capital in the streets, taking the street, actually celebrating their victory. And I do believe Bashir time, as I told you, is going to an end now.
Jean-Baptiste, you're itching to get in, aren't you? I mean, do you agree that we may be witnessing a slight fragmentation, if you like, of the armed forces in favour of the protesters?
Yes, I think in the past 48 hours we've reached a critical phase, not only because obviously the size of the mobilization is unprecedented. It's really a sea of people that we could see in the past 2 days, but also, as your other speaker said, because of the fact that some elements of the military have taken the side of protesters. Now, it's important to caveat this by saying that There were reports also of military units being deployed alongside the security services in other places. And my research on revolutions led me to think that the crucial fact, the military in this situation often tends to behave not on the basis of some kind of corporate or organizational interest, but mostly on the basis of what's happening on the ground. And the units that have been, facing this sea of protesters for the past 2 days have fraternized with the demonstrators. It doesn't mean that the military as a whole has tilted yet against Bashir.
Right.
And it's quite possible that if Bashir reasserts the initiative, the regime could still survive. So the situation is very open-ended right now, and we can expect these soldiers who fraternize with demonstrators to actually try to go a step further, because now that they've committed insubordination, they will be punished if Bashir survives. So they have an interest in making sure that he goes. But this is not a guaranteed outcome. Now, to go back to the issue of the international community, I'd like to react to what was said, because I really don't think the Troika has really made a strong statement in January. Actually, dozens of people had already been killed, and the Troika stopped short of condemning these killings. And similarly, the EU yesterday made a statement where they're stopping short of calling for a democratic transition. And I think what drives the stance of both the EU and the US in the case of Sudan is a concern over stability and the impact that any destabilization in Sudan can have on migration.
Right.
But destabilization is already there, and a regime that relies on fear is not a guarantee of stability in the future.
All right,
the biggest risk actually at the moment is that the regime would fracture, and we could see a civil war if the regime fractures. So really, to ensure long-term stability, I think Western powers should encourage a democratic transition at the moment. It's really the only guarantee of stability in the long run.
David, would you agree with Jean-Baptiste's analysis that it is fear of greater fracturing of the status quo that is keeping many of the Western powers quiet and refraining from getting any more involved? And obviously, looking at what's going on in Libya and looking at the situation in Algeria might be giving them pause as well.
Well, I would agree that may contribute to what is happening in Sudan and how the protesters are thinking. I do not think, however, that the position of the international community is going to make the difference in terms of what actually happens on the ground in Sudan. It's going to be up to a combination of the protesters on the one hand and the security forces on the other that continue to back the Bashir government. The position of the international community is really on the margins, and we can debate whether the position or the statement of the Troika is a strong statement or not a strong statement. I'm perfectly willing to accept the fact that it's not as strong as perhaps it should have been. But even had it been stronger, I don't think it would make any difference on the situation on the ground.
Khalid, at this particular moment, you sound pretty confident. Do you get a sense, Khalid, that the campaign to get President Omar Al Bashir to quit peacefully, do you get a sense that you're on the cusp of success right now?
I believe that we are very close to the moment of the victory of the people will. There is actually, there are different wrong assumptions about the situation in Sudan that mislead the analysis about the power of the regime and the role of the regime in the region. That's why for more than 3 months now, the international actors kept that skeptical about the situation in Sudan, and they can't believe that Bashir ruling is going to an end. And but the streets actually now decide that they are not going back till they be sure Bashir step down and transfer the power for a civil transitional government.
Right.
There is a wide consensus now between the opposition, including the political parties, the armed movement, the civil society, the professional association, and there is agreement that we are going to work together, not just to topple Bashir regime. No, we are going to work together for 4 years of transition to stabilize the country, fix the economy issue,
All right. Okay.
end the civil war in Sudan,
All right,
and making Sudan
nice.
play a positive role.
Let me jump in, because I don't really want to hear the opposition manifesto right now, because we're not there yet. Jean-Baptiste, now this is a very wily operator, isn't he? He survived for 30 years running Sudan amidst all these conflicts, all these wars. He's lost South Sudan as part of his territory. He's lost a lot of his own oil revenue. He's also got the ICC arrest warrant hanging over his head. Some people would suggest that he's not going anywhere until such time as he can ensure that whoever takes over will protect him from having to appear at The Hague.
Well, that's true if he keeps the loyalty of at least some elements in the military and security apparatus. But if somehow the Sudanese armed forces, the National Intelligence and Security Services, and the rapid support forces turned altogether against him, then he would have nowhere to go. And this is where I think it's misguided to think that these are only kind of national and local dynamics. I think the international community has an important role to play here, because when the international community appears to acquiesce to 100 days of repression by not even condemning the killings, it gives people in the security apparatus the impression that Bashir is going to survive because he can do whatever he wants to survive. The international community is not going to even raise a finger. So I think if we want a democratic transition in Sudan, it will have to come first and foremost by elements of the security and military apparatus turning against Bashir, and anything that can facilitate that will be a first step towards a democratic transition. Although obviously, given the way the regime is structured, any democratic transition will have to face with the delicate question of what to do with all these armed men who have been using most of the state's resources in the current regime and who will not disappear anytime soon.
Okay. David, I mean, do you agree with that? The fact that this is a man who has run pretty much a military economy, hasn't he, for 30 years to fund the various conflicts within the country. He's not going to go easily. Jean-Baptiste suggests that it's going to have a certain amount of international help to facilitate a peaceful transition.
Well, I certainly agree that it is dependent upon the military and the security forces as to whether he stays or is removed. I've heard estimates as high as 75% of the budget going to support some element of the security services. If that estimate is anywhere near close, and it may be too high, that suggests that he has invested an enormous amount in the security apparatus in Sudan, and there's going to be a reluctance by the leaders, at least, of that operation to turn against him. But once they start turning, if they turn, that's going to make all the difference in the world. Again, I think it's naive to overestimate the influence of the international community. It's also my impression that the United States did condemn the violence in the country and the killings a number of weeks ago. I don't know what the European Union has done, but I believe the United States has done that. And the United States is not impacted by the migration issue. The European Union, of course, is. But the role of the U.S. here is a little bit different, I think, than the European Union.
All right. Khalid, what is the opposition's plan? At the moment, it looks very much to be a kind of loose amalgam of a variety of groups from civil society, the Professionals Association, the young people. What is the plan? You mentioned that there's a transitional council that's been formed. Is a leadership emerging then among the opposition?
Actually, the structure of the opposition is a reflection of Sudan. Sudan is a very diverse country, so we need a wide umbrella that's representative for the different actors of Sudan. That's why it consists from the professionals, civil society, our movement, and political parties. We signed the Declaration of Freedom and Change 4 months back, and that actually represents our plan for transition. And today, we go further for more practical step. We form a leadership council also a representative leadership council that has been agreed between the different segments of the opposition. And the tasks of this leadership council is to transfer the power for a transitional government, is to negotiate with the army the steps for this transition, and to ensure the stability during the first days of transition.
And
this is our plan for also.
Sorry, can I just
3 weeks back? Just last point.
Can I just ask you whether you think that the army is ready to be that partner in dialogue? Is the army ready to start negotiating a way forward?
I think so. The army has been put under the pressure of people. The army actually has been reluctant to engage in the turmoil that is taking the country for the last 3 months. But people went to have a huge sit-in in front of the army headquarters, put the army under pressure, and the acts of the army till now show that they are taking the right decision, the side of the people. So we appoint this this leadership council to negotiate with the army the steps of the transition of power, the transfer of power to the civil transitional government. Also, we have 3 weeks back, we consist 3 committees that has been that wrote the transitional framework for transition, the transitional constitution, and also the emergency plan for the first 6 months, because we know very much the situation in Sudan need a quick fix measures.
All right,
to deal with the economy issue.
Can I interrupt, because we are running out of time, sadly. So it sounds very much as though the opposition is has organised itself. Do you suspect that you're going to need outside help, or do you think that the people of Sudan are going to be able to manage this transition alone?
Actually, we want outside coordination. We managed to do all that without significant support from outside. And today, we call the international and the regional community to cooperate with the people of Sudan at this crucial moment, because Sudan is vital for the region, and the stabilization of Sudan is very important for this region. So we need the cooperation of our neighbor, of the international community. Sudan has played a very negative role during this regime era outside the country. And now we are promising, we do believe that there is an opportunity for the world to have a positive actor in a very important region of the world.
Jean-Baptiste, we haven't got very much time, but last word to you. It's going to take much more than just the army. Give us a very brief synopsis, if you like, of the various power factors that make up the armed forces of Sudan.
The question now is whether the armed forces are going to split, or whether the threat of a civil war, which is very real, will convince loyalist officers to tag along with the rebellion, or vice versa, a rebellious officer to give up if they think that their colleagues are not going to move. So what's going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours may be crucial. Now, there is hope, because the Sudanese civil society is full of very qualified and people who can step in and take part in the transition governments towards free elections. So under the right conditions, we could see a democratic transition happen.
All right, gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you all very much indeed. Jean-Baptiste Gallopin talking to us from Berlin, David Shinn talking to us from Washington, and of course Khalid Omer Yousif talking to us from London. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, you can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website aljazeera.com. Should you want more discussion, as I'm sure you will, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, and then there's always the Twitter sphere. At AJ Inside Story is for the programme. For me, I'm at Martine Dennis. From the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.